Warning. This documentary contains spoilers for the following.
The time comes soon when... What?
Stitch him up and transfer him in with the rest of Batch 89.
Look at you. What do you believe in, huh? What do you believe in?
I believe whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger.
Don't you turn your back on me, Harry Potter! I want you to look at me when I kill you! I want to see the light leave your eyes!
You know who I am?
Now, say my name. Heisenberg. You're goddamn right.
What makes a villain compelling? How should you go about writing and structuring the threat to your hero? Well, you could take a few approaches. You could do something like this.
To the depths.
Life is cruel. Why should the afterlife be any different?
Or you could go down this route.
Is everything to your liking?
Are you kidding me? This is the best chicken I have ever had.
I'm delighted to hear that.
No, really, I'm serious. I mean, it's crispy, but it's not dried out. And the seasoning, it's so flavorful.
Or you could just stick to the basics and go for something like this. And let's maybe not go down the MODOK from Ant-Man Quantumania path, yeah? But recognizing what's plainly not good is the easy part. The hard part, however, is everything else. Take Voldemort. A textbook villain in the sense of, I am dark, I am powerful, all who oppose me must die, and I have a special connection to the hero. Blatantly classic, but not ineffective. So what makes him work? Well, there are a few factors that compose his villainy. His goal and his motive, for example. On paper, his aim is fairly standard, to rid the world of muggles. But what instills fear are his methods. He's not simply killing his enemies and then he's done with it. He explains why he feels they should die, and then prolongs their suffering. And it's this level of malice that can make for a truly terrifying villain. The execution of Voldemort is what sets him aside from all of the shortcomers, and there are lots of them. And this can be applied to a range of villains from various different origins. So let's explore how these guys did it.
Hi, I'm Damien. And I'm Jamie, and this is the thank you to the satisfying villain.
Get out!
When you want to write a villain for your piece, it's important to consider a few key factors. This can be boiled down into a simple formula. We'll keep it vague, so it can be changed to suit your specific needs. Establish presence, establish goals. Establish motive for achieving the goal. Goals must clash with the hero. Goals must be sabotaged by the hero.
One of the most effective ways to go about a villain, no matter who or what they are, is for the villain to be thematically tied to the hero. For example, Voldemort was mistreated by Muggles, so he grew up with the goal of destroying them, while Harry was also mistreated by Muggles, but he had a good enough heart to know that doesn't justify wiping them out. Another example of this would be the conflict between Caesar and Koba. Caesar was raised by a loving human in Will Rodman, while Koba was abused and mistreated in his youth. Both have the same outlook on humans in the sense that they should be avoided, but where they differ is Caesar knows there's more to humans than just their darkness, whereas Koba is hell-bent on destroying them in the most horrific way. And it's this idea of obsession that will give your villain, evil or otherwise, a real drive.
The motive of the villain should ideally be established before the third act. You shouldn't enter the latter portions of your story without the audience having a clear understanding of what the villain wants. Here's an example. In Watch Dogs Legion, the villain is Sabine. She's a fellow watchdog helping the protagonist in his missions, and her goal is to rid the world of all advanced technology. I think we can both agree this is a bad goal, but her ideology is thought-provoking. Her question is, in a world this far gone, is it enough to be a watchdog? But this interesting motive isn't revealed until the last few minutes of the story. This may appear to be a good idea at first, because wow, she's mysterious. But the reason this is a problem is because it robs the story of nuance. This could have been a strong theme throughout the game, but it's relegated to the final moments. This isn't the way you want to go about structuring your villains, especially thematic villains. Imagine if Darth Sidious didn't reveal until the final act of Return of the Jedi that he wanted the Jedi dead. Order 66 would have happened in episode 3, but we wouldn't have any idea why. Then the so-called reveal would feel hollow and anticlimactic. This is the fate Sabine suffers. She could have stuck in our memories, but unfortunately, she hasn't.
I'm sure you've watched loads of films in your time, which means you've had exposure to a range of villain types. So you may be thinking, we can't compare Devon Weston to Sauron, and you'd be right, we can't. Both are inarguably villains, and very good ones in their own respective planes, but they're entirely different. Sauron is a menacing, powerful, ancient lord, and well, Devon Weston is just a billionaire who never fails to enrage people.
I'm a major shareholder in that same studio, so what we just did is practically legal. Ha!
And this is where it becomes important to understand the different categories of villains. Some can cross categories, and lots do, but again, we're giving you a brief overview of the different classes. So let's get started.
This town deserves a better class of criminal, and I'm gonna give it to him.
We have 5 villain categories here for you, with the first 2 being inspired by the closer look. Each of these categories come with their own unique qualities. We'll sort some examples into them after they've been established.
We start with monster villains. These are villains that are typically featured in epic stories. They are undoubtedly evil, and lots of viewers see them as cool, and they are always thrilled to see when they are on screen. These villains are usually immortal, powerful, with some kind of magic, or they could just be large monsters. In the rare case, a monster villain can be a human character. Hannibal Lecter or Kilgrave would qualify.
Then we have the villains that are more relatable to us. These are villains that would exist in our real world and have the potential to influence lives on a large scale. These villains usually infiltrate groups, are elusive lawbreakers or political figures, just to name a few examples. We'll call these civilian villains, and they are truly a force to be reckoned with.
Next up we have the philosophy villain. These are villains who believe they have a reason or a justification for what they do, and perhaps the scariest part is we can often see where they're coming from, even if we don't agree with the methods. These outlooks often come from their worldviews.
We also have the more tragic side of villainy. I'm of a mind to call these the victim villains, and they are excellent at pulling on the heartstrings, at times. Villains who are the way they are because of circumstance, some of these being manipulation, torture, or coercion. Their actions are inexcusable, but what led them there can be heartbreaking. Villainy happens to them, not for them.
Finally, we have the twist villain, someone who initially appeared to be on the side of the hero, but was a thorn in their side the whole time, someone who was actively working against the hero to serve their own needs under the guise of an ally.
Now that our categories are formed, we're going to give you some examples of each.
Some typical cases of monster villains include Sauron, Voldemort, Darth Sidious, Vecna, and Smaug.
Some examples of the civilian villain are Joffrey Baratheon, Walter White, David from The Last of Us, Commodus, and Dolores Umbridge.
In terms of the philosophy villain, some of the guys we have lined up here are the Joker, Dutch van der Linde, Haytham Kenway, Ultron, and Grand Admiral Thrawn.
For the victim villains, we have Darth Vader, Dr. Octopus, Gollum, Two-Face, and General Grievous.
And finally, some of the twist villains we have lined up here are Micah Bell, Mercer Frey, the Reverse Flash, Alexander Pierce, and Obadiah Stane.
I'd also like to mention that there are a group of characters that, admittedly, don't fully qualify as villains. But I'd like to include them because for the majority of their screen time, they are portrayed this way. Until a definitive moment, typically in the final stages of their movie or franchise. We'll name this group suspected villains. People such as Howard Hamlin, Severus Snape, and Dreyfus from Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. More on them later.
The power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
When creating a villain, it's important that you establish which category they're going to fall into. If you want to change the category later, taking note of this will help you keep your plans focused. But beware, there are certain sums of villain categories that may end up being contradictory. This would be like 2 + 2 = 5. Here's an example for you. At the beginning of The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, the dwarves of Erebor are under siege and scattered. The city of Dale has been destroyed. The dreadful Smaug has laid claim to the mountain. See, all that is established at this point is that Smaug is greedy and wants the mountain for himself. Without expanding on him from now until the end of the desolation of Smaug, it would stick out like a sore thumb if you were to suddenly introduce a factor of empathy for him. Because let's say, his mother abused him as a dragonling. It would ruin the idea of dominance that came with him initially and make him small. Not to mention it's silly. He's clearly meant to inspire fear, not empathy. If you wanted to write a story of a heartbroken, lonely dragon, set it up first. It's Smaug's imposing nature that makes him what he is. Like Bilbo Baggins said, Smaug the Stupendous. And with that, we're going to go into more detail with these categories. So let's get started with the monster villain.
Monster villains often have grandeur. They don't get under your skin in the same way a civilian villain does. They're more known for their grand plans, the schemes. Someone like Hannibal Lecter, his appeal is his disturbing demeanor. These villains always go on to become iconic because we're always looking forward to when they're next going to be on screen. With that in mind, let's start talking about Vecna.
He's someone who has his own viewpoint on the world he inhabits and seeks to enforce his ideals upon our world. He has no intention of negotiating or reasoning with our protagonist, whether it's his way or no way. A villain in the purest sense of the word, and the brilliant style upon the substance of his villainy is of course his disturbingly creepy appearance. When you consider monster villains, it's important to ensure you're staying away from the realm of relatability. I sure as hell hope you can't relate to Smaug. If you think you can, it may be time to invest in therapy, because Smaug embodies all the things narcissistic and apathetic. He's very clearly of the purest evil.
I kill where I wish, when I wish.
Then again, there may be some of you who are secretly rooting for characters like Smaug because of their enormity and the presence they bring with them. It's impossible to have this kind of thrill with a character like Walter White. You can, however, get a thrill from the
"Say my name"
scene, but not like this.
Do you now?
It's different. Sidious is another one. He's a sadistically cruel and uncaring character who seeks only to shape the galaxy as he sees fit. Usually the only thing that distinguishes monster villains is the aesthetics. As I'm sure you've noticed, Sidious and Voldemort are very similar. It's hard for a writer to exploit their distinct character flaws, nor does the audience really care about them, and these are the factors we usually focus on for every other type of villain. How about Kilgrave? Another monster villain to make your skin crawl. The things he gets people to do with his powers.
Hey! I said this isn't a library!
Pick up that coffee. Throw it in your face.
I think Kilgrave's villainy hits harder than a lot of other monster villains, because his villainy is much smaller scale and much more personal. A mixture of monster and civilian, really. As Damien said, villains can cross over categories, but we'll get to that. He's not interested in world domination or blowing up the Earth, he's ruining people's lives as an afterthought, and that's what makes him repulsive. It's entirely understandable to get the sense that these monster villains will get boring with time, due to the repetition, but what keeps them fresh is their execution. With Voldemort, he's creepy and cruel, while Sidious is conniving, and Sauron is just plain brutal. Now Kilgrave very nicely sets up for our next category, the villains that can easily exist in real life. A truly disturbing thought. Next up, we have the civilian villain.
Everyone and their mother hates civilian villains, and they always hate them more than that of the monster villain. The civilian villain should appeal to reality. There should be something about this character that reminds you of the nastiness that people in our day-to-day lives unfortunately wield. This would then aggravate the audience's dark side, leading to frustration, especially when the villain is getting their way. Who better to start with than Walter White?
Just what the hell was that, exactly?
You might want to hold off.
Yeah? Why?
Because your boss is gonna need me. 6353 Juan Tabo, apartment 6. Yeah.
As you can see, a very powerful presence. He starts his journey as a somewhat sympathetic character. The creator of Breaking Bad, Vince Gilligan, stated, "The pilot is to make the audience sympathise with Walt. However, the rest of the show is a test to see how long the viewer will stay with him." Over the course of the show, we learn that he is the architect of his own sense of inadequacy. At first, it's an, "oh man, I could have done more" situation. But over the course of the show, we realise it's his own doing. He put himself there. By the series' end, he admits everything, and if you haven't lost it already, you'll realise that he was always undeserving of your sympathy.
One more time that you did this for the family.
I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. I was alive.
Once his evil has had time to gestate, people are more like chess pieces to him, something to be used and then discarded. And I know it seems like we're bashing him a lot. Well, let me tell you, there are many awe-inspiring moments from him, even early on in his journey.
You got one part of that wrong. This is not meth.
That would take some serious balls, and to my eye that's an entirely appropriate move to make from a man who feels he has nothing to lose. Walter White's crimes are much closer to the ground than that of the monster villain. People like Sidious and Vecna kill and maim, but Walter's deeds feel so much more despicable because of how close to reality it is. This is a villain that appeared innocent, a man who was dealt a bad hand, but all the while was living a double life and feeding his darkness until it was all he was. I mentioned earlier that civilian villains can be elusive lawbreakers as well as other things. There's so much more to unpack here. And when you reach the end of Breaking Bad, the show conjures within you feelings of betrayal. This is something that Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould are immensely good at, suggesting something is one way when it never was. We'll make a couple more points on this later. A civilian villain can also be someone of high standing in society. People who have either attacked society from within or secretly rose the ranks until they were too powerful to stop.
Filthy hands off me, you pathetic little man! Hello, Father.
You are no son of mine.
They can also be placed in a position of power because of a technicality, and by the time they're in said position, anyone who would try to set things right can be branded treasonous. If you haven't guessed, I'm talking about King Joffrey Baratheon.
Leave her face. I like her pretty.
Man, my lady's overdressed. Unburden her.
Wow, George Martin really wanted to push the boundaries of just how truly disgusting a king can be, even though his grandfather Tywin was really running things. Now, Joffrey is a youngster. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean he isn't evil. It can be hard to believe that some young people have such a capacity for malice. Well, as I'm sure you've heard many times before, it's all about the upbringing, and Joffrey was brought up by a venomous snake. Joffrey became King of the Seven Kingdoms after a technicality. His mother, Cersei Lannister, installed him because Joffrey's second name is Baratheon, the sort of royal family in Westeros. Seeing as Joffrey is born of incest, he doesn't actually have a claim to the throne. But of course, the world sees him as the son of King Robert Baratheon, so no one batted an eye. When the foul Cersei gave Robert way too much wine from behind the scenes, Robert was killed by a boar he was meant to be hunting. Then, when Eddard Stark realised the truth about Joffrey, that he is in fact a Lannister, it was already too late. Joffrey was already sitting on the Iron Throne, and his rule had begun. And of course, Ned appeared treasonous to everyone who lived in the kingdoms for suggesting that Joffrey's seat on the throne wasn't just. This led to immense friction between the Starks and Lannisters, who were now in power. Then Joffrey went back on his word to spare Ned's life in front of his betrothed, Sansa Stark, Ned's daughter. He made her watch as Eddard lost his head, and it was revealed that this boy was not what he had appeared to be. He was a beast. And sadly, many people would lose their lives to his savagery.
I imagine it must be so exciting to squeeze your finger here and watch something die over there.
Could you do it? Could you kill something?
I don't know, Your Grace. Do you think I could?
Yes.
Would you like to watch me?
Yes.
Characters like Cersei Lannister and Dolores Umbridge also fall under civilian villain, people who penetrate society from the inside, like Cersei forcing her way to the Iron Throne, and Umbridge essentially transforming Hogwarts into a prison. But the reason I mention these two in particular is because these characters are the ones who are usually responsible for giving these future disasters like Joffrey free reign until they then become too dangerous to stop. I think we all know someone like Joffrey, or Draco Malfoy, that as a result of these insufferable Karens, haven't known true discipline, and thought themselves above all, which leads to cruelty and malice being their default. Perhaps it's not their fault, but by God they must be punished. So it's entirely common for civilian villains to create civilian villains. The categories to come aren't exempt from this idea, however. You couldn't put a bad word against the downfall of these characters if you wanted to. The demise of King Joffrey, the moment that Harry turns the tables on Umbridge.
Tell them I mean no harm!
I'm sorry, Professor. I must not tell lies.
What are you doing? I am Senior Under-Secretary to Laura Jane Umbridge. Let me go!
Okay, granted, Cersei's moment of defeat wasn't the best writing in the world. I certainly wouldn't put my name on that. But I think we all felt a lot of pleasure during that long, drawn-out shame walk that she had to endure. I am not the High Sparrow's biggest fan, but that scene made me appreciate him a little bit more than usual. Now we make way for a slightly more respectable kind of villain. Next up is the philosophy villain.
The philosophy villain is one of the most interesting villains to write in fiction. They're the ones who have an ideology and a code, one that they are completely unwilling to compromise on. We understand what they want, but more importantly, we understand why they want it. These are the villains who, above all else, make us think.
We're going to start with the clear-cut philosophy villain, Thanos.
You're much more of a Thanos.
A man who very much believes in both the mission and the methods. He believes the universe will genuinely be better off once his goal is achieved. He also fully understands that most everyone else will stand against him. He was so dedicated to his cause that he killed his daughter for it, taking no pleasure in it, mind you. So that tells us he's not a complete monster in the sense that he enjoys pain and suffering, and that seems to be a running theme for a lot of these philosophical bad guys. So with that, we have, like we said earlier, a clear-cut philosophy villain, someone who fully and uncompromisingly believes in their mission but takes no pleasure in the violence that will naturally follow. Another inhabitor of this idea is the Grand Admiral of the Galactic Empire, Thrawn.
What was first just a dream has become a frightening reality for those who may oppose us.
Someone who, for all intents and purposes, is forcing his way of life onto the galaxy, but with the belief that it's what's best for the civilians. And what's more, it's not a baseless belief. As we learn in The Mandalorian, a lot of people thrived under the rule of the Empire. This ideology is entirely autocratic, and shouldn't be allowed to thrive. The rebels in Star Wars want freedom, but Thrawn argues that people prosper under the Empire's rule, and they have the statistics to prove it. Discipline without freedom is tyranny, but freedom without discipline is chaos.
Long live the Empire.
This brings us to our third example of the philosophy villain, Haytham Kenway.
Father, Connor, any last words? Wait, a poor choice.
Haytham is the Grand Master of the colonial right of the Templar Order. Once again, someone who seeks order and prosperity for mankind. Unlike the Empire, the Templars rule from behind the curtain, influencing political figures to enforce their ideals upon society. We can all agree that straight out the gate, this is bad news.
I watch them fight and die in the name of freedom. They speak of liberty and justice, but for who?
The Templars pose an existential threat to all of man, but are so ensconced in their notions of heroism and nobility. They truly believe they are the knight in shining armor, Haytham most of all. We'll get to that. He's the son of beloved pirate turned assassin Edward Kenway, and father of Ratona Keton, later named Connor Kenway. Haytham, through manipulation, was raised into the fold of the assassin's eternal enemies, the Templars. His story is a tragic one, but he always led with gumption. He carries himself tall and proud and brings a commanding presence wherever his duties take him. What makes this character so convincing is his assurance that his path is the path of the righteous. His belief in his cause is so intense, and that's admirable.
But let me be clear. Should you ever dare to insult or threaten me again, I'll not hesitate but to cut off your head myself. Are we understood? Excellent. Good day.
The way he explains his perspective also draws in the audience because more often than not, his ideals tickle the player's philosophical fancy. Haytham is undoubtedly a villain, but his welcoming nature and panache make it difficult to ignore his side of things. He lives and breathes off the belief that the Templars fight and struggle day by day to see the world united under a fair and just rule, and that all the nations will finally share a common goal, that of understanding the Isu. The friction between Haytham and his son in this scene is just so powerful. This argument between them during the wake of the Tea Party is some of the best writing gaming has to offer.
Tell me something. You could have killed me when we first met. What stayed your hand?
Curiosity. Any other questions?
What is it the Templars truly seek?
Order. Purpose. Direction. No more than that. It's your lot that means to confound with this nonsense talk of freedom. Time was. The assassins professed a far more sensible goal. That of peace.
Freedom is peace.
Oh no. It's an invitation to chaos. Only look at this little revolution your friends have started. I have stood before the Continental Congress and listened to them stamp and shout, all in the name of liberty. But it is just noise.
And this is why you favor Lee?
He understands the needs of this would-be nation far better than the jobberknolls who profess to represent it.
It seems your tongue has tasted sour grapes. The people have made their choice, and it was Washington.
The people chose nothing. It was done by a group of privileged cowards seeking only to enrich themselves. They convened in private and made a decision that would benefit them. Oh, they might have dressed it up with pretty words. That does not make it true. The only difference, Connor, the only difference between myself and those you aid is that I do not feign affection.
Haytham is the embodiment of his exact words. The Templars represent purpose, he seeks and delivers it. Most of the Templars throughout Assassin's Creed are enthralled by power and drunk with the riches it brings. Haytham, on the other hand, is on a mission. The goal he's aiming for provides the security he believes the world truly cannot do without. Haytham's vision is a world of peace and prosperity. He truly wants the best for humankind, but what he can't see is that his methods and way of getting to the finish line are extremely callous. The same can be said for many philosophy villains.
Come to confess your sins?
I don't know. How much time you got?
More than you.
Have you been juicing? A little vibranium cocktail? You're looking, I don't want to say puffy.
You're stalling to protect the people.
Well, that is the mission. Did you forget?
I've moved beyond your mission. I'm free.
A very interesting case of philosophy villain is Ultron, a peacekeeping algorithm that wants to destroy humanity. He severely misunderstood the message and treated protecting the world from people as his sole purpose. He didn't think there'd be peace until there was literal peace. He also exhibits a lot of Tony Stark. He's very headstrong and cocky. You could say in a lot of ways he's Stark's son, and that's how he's portrayed a lot of the time, an idea that Stark himself also humorously taunts Ultron with.
Aw, Junior. You're gonna break your old man's heart.
If I have to.
His abilities are very Iron Man, as are his mannerisms and humor, very dry, very cocksure. He also has a bit of a temper. He cut Ulysses Claw's arm off because he was compared to Tony. Going on the idea of the inverted Tony, he built Ultron for peacekeeping purposes, but took it a step too far.
They couldn't get past the bouncer.
The problem is, Ultron believes that is what he's doing. He believes what's wrong with the world is the people. This is what makes him a philosophy villain. He believes the Avengers have misdiagnosed the problem. Again, staying true to the philosophy villain, he didn't give in just because of death. Even in death, he argued his point. Just like Thanos and Haytham, Ultron went out standing by his way. He didn't quit until he was gone. Seeing as he's a program, it's entirely understandable how it's just not in his nature to abandon the mission. He's literally an algorithm, but all philosophy villains function the same way. They aren't following a program, but they are following a code. Here's one that'll have you questioning your heroes. Helmut Zemo, a former soldier, part of the Sokovian kill squad. During the battle with Ultron, his entire family was killed. He sought revenge on the Avengers, but knew he couldn't kill them himself, so he devised a plan to turn them on each other.
An empire toppled by its enemies can rise again. But one which crumbles from within, that's dead. Forever.
He has a personal motive, his wife and son. His whole world is gone because of the Avengers. He's admirable as a villain because he did so much damage to these superheroes without enhancements or powers. It's more psychological warfare. His greatest weapon is his patience. He waited for so long for the opportunities he needed to arise and the plan he needed to make them work. There are a few moments in the film where his plan didn't work, and he has to quickly course correct. Again, his ability to bounce back is what makes him formidable. Of all the Avengers' enemies, just this one man with no powers or abilities came the closest to destroying them for good. He became a philosophy villain because he was first a victim. There's an element of relatability to him. It's easy to understand his rage. That's what puts him in the category of philosophy.
I'm going to bed. I love you.
My father lived outside the city. I thought we would be safe there. My son was excited. He could see the Iron Man from the car window. I told my wife, don't worry. They're fighting in the city. We're miles from harm. When the dust cleared and the screaming stopped, it took me 2 days until I found their bodies. And my father, still holding my wife and son in his arms. And the Avengers, they went home.
It's easy to understand where the philosophy villains are coming from, but it's the immortal battle between the cause and the methods. Zemo could have been a hero if he had done things differently, but then again, maybe all he wanted was to leave a massive dent in the Avengers, which he did.
You know, I really love these kinds of areas. Very picturesque. Peaceful. Brings to mind the idea of solitude. And solitude prompts me to think of the villains that aren't born off of their own accord. Sometimes, villainy isn't part of a villain's true nature. Here's an example. Saul Goodman's deeds stem from his own nature. But these villains, they weren't evil to begin with. Yeah? They're a product of circumstance. And perhaps this makes them the most tragic villains of all. These are the victim villains. And we're going to get started with Darth Vader.
Director Krennic.
Lord Vader.
You seem unsettled. Be careful not to choke on your aspirations, Director.
Or Anakin Skywalker, depending on who in the galaxy you ask. A seemingly regular slave boy growing up on Tatooine. A selfless boy, giving his time up without a second thought to help others. This caught the attention of one of the few Jedi who had a clear understanding of what the Jedi should be at the time, Qui-Gon Jinn. After a measure of time, he was inducted into the Jedi Order and became Obi-Wan's Padawan after Qui-Gon fell. Qui-Gon's defeat didn't bode well for Anakin's circumstances, because Obi-Wan didn't have the foresight to steer Anakin from his dark potential. That's why the battle that pitted Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon against Darth Maul was named Duel of the Fates. It's Anakin's fate that's in question. Anakin has always been a victim of circumstance, growing up as a slave, but his overarching compassion made him somewhat content with his early life. It wasn't until he became a Jedi and was made to fight in the Clone Wars that he really hardened. During Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, he first experienced his clairvoyance in a pressing instance, where he saw his mother in dire need of salvation. When he attempted to address this issue with Obi-Wan, he downplayed it, claiming it was just a dream, and that Anakin should stay focused. When Anakin's instinct to see to his mother overcame his duty to stay on Naboo, he ventured to Tatooine with Padme, only to find that it was too late. His mother died in his arms, and this resulted in a mass slaughter of the Tuskens responsible. This is the beginning of his descent. In Episode 3, Anakin is simultaneously more refined and more vulnerable. He has more control of his inner conflict, but he also has more to lose. He's haunted in his dreams by premonitions of losing Padme and his unborn child, which, as we know, is exploited by Palpatine. And every attempt by the Jedi to convince Anakin of this treachery seems more to him like they're trying to sabotage what Anakin believes to be a fruitful relationship. Palpatine's promises to save Anakin's love from certain death is most definitely a key motivator, and the seed is planted for Darth Vader's birth. Anakin sees this as, the Jedi can't save my wife. This man can teach me how. And when Windu states that Palpatine is too dangerous to be left alive, Anakin realizes, or believes that he realizes, that there is truly no difference between the Jedi and the Sith. Then Anakin joins Palpatine and Windu is defeated. And this is where it happens. Now Anakin is gone, Darth Vader has taken his place.
The Force is strong with you. A powerful Sith you will become. Henceforth, you shall be known as
Darth Vader.
Thank you, my master.
And he hunts the Jedi in the temple, destroying them all. But at least at this point he still believes he's doing it for Padme. But what he fails to realise is that the dark side has an insatiable appetite, and its hunger never ceases. When he goes to Mustafar and vanquishes the Separatists, it is too late. Padme approaches and rushes to greet who she thinks is the Anakin she knows. Vader greets her, and by this point, his hunger is too great. The dark side continues to grow until he ambitiously claims he can defeat the newly appointed Emperor. He and Obi-Wan then have one of the most emotional fights in the history of Star Wars, and upon Anakin's defeat, he is burnt to a crisp. Palpatine senses this, travels to Mustafar and collects Anakin up, and here is where he is put into the iconic Darth Vader suit. But what it really is a cage he'll be spending the rest of his life in. Anakin only did what he thought was best for his wife, but as a result of strategic manipulation, was turned into something he never intended.
Lord Vader, can you hear me?
Yes, Master. Where is Padme? Is she safe? Is she all right?
It seems in your anger, you killed her.
I couldn't have. She was alive. I felt it.
Another iconic victim villain we can put under the microscope is Dr. Octopus. Unlike Darth Vader, Doc Ock isn't a victim of circumstance. He's a victim of his own brilliance, creating his extraordinary mechanical arms with the intent for them to help him realise his vision. They instead twist his vision and desire into something ugly. In some versions of the tale, Otto Octavius can recognise the pain his brilliant mind has brought upon his world, but sometimes his invention leaves his mind warped and determined to further improve his marvellous monstrosity. In Spider-Man 2, Dr. Octopus made incredible arms with the intention of realising his vision. When the experiment goes pear-shaped in Spider-Man 2 and leaves Dr. Octopus without the device separating his consciousness from the arms, he falls victim to their will and desire, which is almost the same as his own, just without the care of anyone standing in his way or just near him. It's not until Peter is able to reach Otto's soul again that he can reclaim control of his brilliant machine. His intellect very nearly outpaced his conscience, but in the end, the light prevailed. Now here is a dreadful tale, and certainly a haunting one.
Blesses and splashes, precious. That's a meaty mouthful.
Back. Stay back. I'm warning you. Don't come any closer.
It's got an elfish blade, but it's not an elf's. Not an elf's, no. What is it, precious? What is it?
My name is Bilbo Baggins.
Bagginses. What is a Bagginses, precious?
Smeagol is a fantastic example of how an external force can change us. He was a very academic hobbit of the early age. He and his cousin Deagle liked to go fishing together. Well, Here is where the fate of Middle-earth changes. When Deagol finds the One Ring in the bottom of the river, he instantly covets it. When Smeagol lays his eyes on it, however, things get ugly. Smeagol finds himself immediately captivated by the ring, and is quickly willing to kill his cousin for it, with his only defense being that it's his birthday.
Why? Because it's my birthday and I want it.
With Deagol's blood on his hands, he is banished to the mountains, where he lived in possession of the One Ring for 500 years. He gradually turned into a contorted monster, representing the very evil living within him, twisted and terrible. Over the course of these 5 centuries, he spent his days utilising the ring's abilities to assassinate and feast on dead orcs and eating blind fish from the ponds. The ring split his soul in 2, and during this prolonged transformation, the sound of his swallowing made a repulsive guttural sound. The orcs took notice of this and branded him Gollum. Over time, he took to this name, and Smeagol was no more.
Look! See what Smeagol finds?
Gollum is considered by Middle-earth a pathetic creature and one undeserving of sympathy. He'd be undeserving of the audience's sympathy as well if it were not for the ring and that being the cause of his descent. But we must remember that this doesn't excuse him. Even separated from the ring, Gollum still orchestrated Frodo's death and set up Samwise to appear as a snake in the sense that he was sabotaging them by eating all of the bread.
Stupid fat hobbit! It ruins it!
Smeagol's villainy really shows at the end of the Two Towers when he plots with Gollum to kill Frodo and Sam and secure the ring for himself. He even goes as far as to admit it to Sam in a roundabout sort of way in Return of the King.
Sneaking off, are we?
Sneaking? Sneaking? Fat hobbit is always so polite. Smeagol shows them secret ways that nobody else could find. And they say, sneak! Sneak! Very nice, friend. Oh, yes, my precious, very nice.
All right. You just startled me is all. What were you doing?
Sneak.
Don't confuse Gollum's frailty for vulnerability. He is potentially the smartest character in Middle-earth. Just take his love for riddles.
What has roots as nobody sees is taller than trees. Up it goes, and yet never grows.
His calculating puts him a cut above everyone. There's nothing you can do that he won't know about. He's a master survivalist and a cunning blight upon Middle-earth. But what put him there was entirely out of his control, and so he falls in the victim-villain category. Dr. Octopus's arms, the One Ring, and Chancellor Palpatine are all catalysts that cause these characters' villainy to flourish. Villainy was never a part of Anakin's, Otto's, or Smeagol's nature. Anakin was headstrong and very boastful. You could argue that Otto was a tad overconfident, and Smeagol was known for being quite treacherous, but only in a juvenile sense, a prickle in the moment, but no long-term consequences. These characters are unfortunately subject to certain factors in their respective worlds, and when you realise that they didn't choose it, you start to perhaps see them through a different lens. These are villains who, if they possess the will and capacity, can overcome their villainy because it's not an innate part of their nature. Sometimes they do, like Vader and Otto Octavius. But sadly, some don't.
Well, I feel quite sad now. How about you?
Yeah, heartstrings are pulled on for sure. Vader's story is always a tragic one to me.
Yeah. I suppose these are villains that could have been heroes and had massive potential to be. I suppose they were heroes, you know, to some extent, deep down.
Some of them were, they lost themselves, and some of them found themselves again, but others didn't.
This brings to mind a sort of victim villain, the vicious ape, Koba. There's lots I could say about this character, you know.
A more bitter ape there never was.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, and his resentment isn't unfounded, you know?
No, yeah, his viewpoint on the humans came from his own experience with them. Yeah, like Marie said in the second film, you know, he only ever saw the humans' bad side. Koba did as well. The difference between them is that Maurice was able to acknowledge that that's not all humans are.
Yes, yeah.
But to Koba, that was it. You know, he couldn't move on from that.
Apparently, the way that Koba got his blinded eye was that he had a cigarette put out on his eye. Which is awful. Absolutely awful. And I do not wish that upon any living thing. So, you know, you can't say you don't understand his utter hatred. The only problem is, he seems to hate humans that have had nothing to do with any of that. He can't distinguish. To him, human bad, you know?
Yeah, that's just it. That's someone who couldn't move on from his own pain and his own suffering. Even though it is tragic what happened to him, he used that to inflict more pain and suffering.
Yes. That attack on that base. Dreyfus, he's just trying his best to keep everything together, you know? And that poor kid, you remember? The guy trembling with fear. Clearly never held a gun in his life.
Because of Koba's lust for human blood, both human and ape blood was spilled.
Yeah. And that's what Caesar was trying to avoid the whole time. Hence the conflict, you know, the tension between the two. I suppose to Caesar's eye, Koba was a twist villain, you know?
Yes, Koba most certainly stabbed Caesar in the back.
Absolutely. There's a bit of dramatic irony there because all the audience saw that coming. Caesar, none the wiser, you know? He was celebrating with his fellow apes and his newfound human friends because they had just turned on the lights, as he said. You know, they restored power and that was a really great day. And then what happened? I suppose what makes a twist villain what they are is that you don't see it coming. The audience, it's all completely obscured. You know?
I suppose in that sense, like, you know, we all knew Koba was going to be a villain. It's not a twist for us. The power comes from how much it hurts when it does happen.
Absolutely, the betrayal. You know, you don't see it coming. You're not meant to.
Yeah, Dr. Octopus from the first Spider-Man game, the PlayStation game. We all knew Otto was going to go down the path of the villain. That wasn't a twist. Where the power came from was once again how painful it was when they are at conflict.
Yeah. And this brings us to our final category of villain.
So these bad guys are masters of disguise. They've had a stake in the demise of the hero from the very beginning, all under the guise of being a friend. It leaves more of an imprint in your memory.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you've heard the term plot twist. Well, that's what these villains are built around.
And these are the twist villains.
A great way to start off the twist villains is with the Reverse Flash. Eobard Thawne, as we see him in The Flash, is a twist villain purely from the audience's perspective. What's crucial is he was always planning to stab Barry in the back, we just didn't know it. The reason Thawne works so well is because from the first episode it's clear that he's hiding something, but we didn't guess the magnitude until it was revealed. There's even a misdirection to cast aside suspicion, and when that's revealed it grants Thawne a further sense of intelligence. We learn over the course of the show the reasoning for his plan, why he's helping Barry in spite of the fact he hates him. He needs Barry's speed to return to his own time. He couldn't be upfront about that, of course, because the reason he was stranded in the first place was to kill Barry before he could become the Flash. And when that didn't work, he killed his mother. While working with Barry to get his speed up, Thawne actually starts to develop a connection with Barry, but it ultimately doesn't change how he feels about him. So a plot twist is crucial to this type of character's development. This could happen subtly to slowly convince the audience of a person's evil, or could be revealed in one scene, like with Eobard Thawne.
Another effective twist villain is Mercer Frey, the guild master of the Thieves Guild. He is the man in charge. The whole guild is in disarray at the time, and old Delvin Mallory seems to think they're cursed. Since they're all crooks and reprobates, they don't really believe him. Yet they are cursed because the skeleton key was stolen from the Ebonmere. Who did this? Mercer Frey.
I want her head on my mantle.
The Thieves Guild questline leaves you to believe that this phantom figure who has been sabotaging Maven Blackbriar is the villain the guild is facing. Then the way Mercer reacts to learning that this figure is Karliah, he almost bursts out in fury, claiming she was the one who murdered the previous guildmaster, Gallus, all while being entirely convincing of this fact. He then orders us to hunt her down, which I'm sure during the first playthrough you're perfectly fine going along with. But this is where things change. When Karliah and Mercer cross paths again, the player is shot with a paralytic arrow. It seems like Karliah tries to kill you, but she's saving your life. Then it's revealed that Mercer murdered Gallus and framed Karliah. In an instant, the whole narrative has shifted.
Do you honestly think your arrow will reach me before my blade finds your heart?
Give me a reason to try.
You're a clever girl, Karliah. Buying Golden Glow Estate and funding Haunting Brew Meadery was inspired.
To ensure an enemy's defeat, you must first undermine his allies. It was the first lesson Gallus taught us.
You always were a quick study.
Not quick enough, otherwise Gallus would still be alive.
Gallus had his wealth and he had you. All he had to do was look the other way.
Did you forget the oath we took as Nightingales? Did you expect him to simply ignore your methods?
Enough of this mindless banter. Come, Karliah. It's time for you and Gallus to become reunited.
I'm no fool, Mercer. Crossing blades with you would be a death sentence, but I can promise the next time we meet, it will be your undoing.
Then, when Karliah flees, the tragic scene plays out where Mercer attempts to kill the player.
How interesting. It appears Gallus's history has repeated itself. Karliah has provided me the means to be rid of you, and this ancient tomb becomes your final resting place. But do you know what intrigues me the most? The fact that this was all possible because of you. Farewell. I'll be certain to give Brynjolf your regards.
Then the rest of the quests are about convincing the rest of the guild and restoring order.
On to possibly the most hateable villain on this list, Micah Bell.
Die in there cowering like a dog! Or come out and face it like a man!
Micah also succeeds as a twist villain, but differently from Mercer and Thrawn. Because unlike them, we never like Micah. From the beginning, it's clear that he's unpleasant and repulsive, and a pain in the backside for Arthur Morgan, but for a long time, that's all he is. He's the most repellent in the camp by far, but there's a big difference between that and being an outright villain, and the writers use that to keep our suspicions low. In the third act of the game, Micah becomes more manipulative of Dutch, and both Arthur and the player are growing more and more angry with him. So when it's revealed he's the one who's been sabotaging the game for a good while now, our collective hatred of Micah reaches boiling point. We've always disliked him, but now we hate him and want him dead.
Now, John.
I ain't got too much to say no more.
You shot me. You shot me pretty good.
So what do all of these characters have in common? Their villainy is unexpected and hurts the viewer. The feeling of betrayal conjures within us deep feelings of hatred, and in turn creates a very satisfying villain.
It's now time to briefly cover the characters that are portrayed to be villainous. So to the audience's eye, they adopt many traits that are reminiscent of a villain, but in a flash, it's revealed that this was never the case. Dreyfus, Snape, and Howard Hamlin are our top picks, and we're calling these characters the suspected villains. Okay, granted, these aren't villains, not really. So it may be like, what are they even doing in this documentary? But look, What piques our interest is the way that they're portrayed throughout the lion's share of their respective franchises. These characters often play the role of the fall guy, which is incredibly unfair on the character. This individual's portrayal is greatly determined through perspective. Whose lens are we watching them through? And what's the mindset of the person who is viewing this suspected villain? On the first watch of Harry Potter, we're seeing Snape through Harry's eyes, and everything he's doing looks shady. But that is just because Harry always has the wrong end of the stick. So most of the time, the protagonist we're seeing them from the perspective of is a genuine goodie. But sometimes, the protagonist can be the true evil at play.
Dreyfus from Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is a clear-cut example of a suspected villain. When we first meet Dreyfus, he is portrayed as the guy who would gladly wipe out the world of our beloved apes for the sake of the human race. But as the film goes on, we learn that he doesn't want war, but is prepared to go through with it if it comes to it. He has spent God knows how long shepherding the survivors, but the truth is, he's almost as clueless as the rest of them. He only fought back against the apes when they attacked first. He never trusted the apes, and thanks to Koba, you can see why. He then died a heroic but sadly meaningless death, as he incinerated himself believing he would save his people, and no one can take that from him. How about Severus Snape? The head of House Slytherin was never a true villain. He just seemed to be, or is expected to be. Even at what we thought was his darkest moment, the killing of Dumbledore, this was really an act of mercy and obedience. During the moment Snape cast the spell, you can hear the tremble in his voice, the doubt.
Severus. Please. Avada Kedavra.
The recontextualization of this is profound. The first watch, you're obviously thinking Dumbledore is asking Snape to spare him, when in reality he's saying, hurry up, do it. So what we were seeing was not betrayal, but rather a loyal friend fulfilling a promise that shook him to his core. Then, when Snape died in the jaws of Nagini, Harry collected his tears and all was revealed. Snape was a hero from the very start.
You have your mother's eyes.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Hamlin, and I won't have it!
What can we do for you, Jimmy?
Howard Hamlin, the second H in HHM, a man who was forced on several occasions to play the bad guy. Howard never wanted to be a part of Chuck's resentment for Jimmy, but was roped into it because Chuck was more comfortable in the background, pulling the strings. On the first watch, Howard seems like a minor villain because he's seemingly standing in Jimmy's way. But on a second viewing, when we have the full context, it becomes clear that he hasn't actually done anything wrong. All the moments where it looks like Howard's being an antagonist actually have honest reasons behind them. Like when he sends Jimmy money for Chuck. At first, it looks like he's trying to cut Chuck out of the business, but Howard explains this is the arrangement Chuck has with the firm. Or when the Kettlemans leave Jimmy for HHM. Again, initially it looks like Howard has taken business from Jimmy. But the reality is, they left Jimmy first. Howard just picked up the contract. All of these misinterpretations on Jimmy's part create this false image of Howard. He's seen as a roadblock, but really this man always wanted the best for Jimmy. One of the examples of his good intentions is his nickname for Jimmy.
Remember? I used to call you Charlie Hustle.
In short, Howard was an honest and stand-up guy, whose name was slowly destroyed over the final season, and after boiling point was reached, turned into something it never should have been. When Howard turns up at Jimmy and Kim's place, he's there to tear them a new one, and does he? But the Breaking Bad universe is here to do its thing, and that thing is to snatch up the lives of the innocent.
All right, that's enough.
Oh, you know it's true. You just have the guts to admit it.
Great, now you need to go.
I'm gonna make it clear to everyone, because I'm gonna dedicate my life to making sure that everybody knows the truth. Believe it. You can't hide who you really are forever.
When Lalo enters, it's as if the Grim Reaper has come for him.
Oh. Who are you? Me? Nobody. I just need to talk to my lawyers.
Oh, is that right? You want some advice? Find better lawyers.
Howard, please just turn around.
And after a brief moment, Howard realises that Lalo is here for malicious reasons.
What's this about?
Howard attempts to reason with the Salamanca, but his fate was sealed.
Please just tell us what you want.
Well, like I said, to talk.
I think I'm in the middle of something. There's really no need to...
Oh my God! No! Oh my God! No!
Rest in peace to Breaking Bad's purest character.
Perspective can greatly influence all of this. It all depends on how the writer chooses to frame the protagonist. For example, Hank Schrader is one of the main antagonists in Breaking Bad, but he isn't a villain. He's just an honest, if a bit big-headed, DEA agent who's running around in circles not knowing where this Heisenberg will strike next. But still, he is a threat to Walter White. This makes him the antagonist.
This also works the other way round. Take Thanos. In Avengers Infinity War, he is the protagonist. This may come as a surprise, but it's true. Infinity War expands on him and lets us in on why he's doing what he's doing. Two key moments here are his talk with Gamora aboard his ship and the back and forth with Doctor Strange on Titan. So if Thanos is the main character, and the antagonist is the character who threatens the protagonist, then that makes the Avengers the antagonists of a movie named Avengers. It can certainly appear strange, but when the writers choose to focus on the villain, the perspective shifts. Some villains can appear monstrous or inhumane, and with seemingly no hope of redemption, but a somewhat understandable reason for their villainy is revealed later. This also works the other way round, like when a villain slowly betrays their own code, for example, Dutch van der Linde. His crowning moment of betrayal to his own code is in the oil factory, when he turns his back on Arthur Morgan in a time of need.
Of course, the lines without categories can blur. When writing a piece, you may have trouble labelling your villain, perhaps due to uncertainty of motivation. Granted, you can always choose to leave it to viewer interpretation, but there is a time and a place for ambiguity. That being said, it is entirely common for the writers to just leave things as a mystery. For example, why did Walt leave the Leaves of Grass book on the toilet? The answer is never explicitly stated. Many people say it was because he got careless and the power was getting to his head. Vince Gilligan says this is right. Other people thought he simply left it there one day and forgot about it, that after a certain point it was no longer a thing on his mind. Vince says this is also right.
Touching again on ambiguity, I thought it'd be a great time to mention Joel from The Last of Us. He can be seen as both a hero and villain. The ambiguity comes into play because we, the players, know what he did, but we also know why he did it. The player then gets to interpret whether they agree with his choice or not. It also allows us to ask ourselves the question of what would we do if we were in his position.
So, myself and Jamie, we're a classic case of film enthusiasts. It's true. We both grew up loving the big screen. Jamie grew up as a hardcore DC fan, right? And I was really into Star Wars. Every time Darth Vader was on screen, I'd get chills. And you personally loved the Joker, right?
Could quote every single line.
Absolutely. So what have we just stated here? That we love these franchises for the villains. And that's not to say that the heroes aren't great. They are. There's nothing quite like the surprise of Luke Skywalker's green lightsaber in Return of the Jedi, or just any time that Christian Bale's Batman is on screen. These are classic characters. But when it comes to the villains, there's always something far more thrilling. You know, they say when you're growing up, you admire the heroes, but when we reach a certain age, we start to understand the villains. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Villains often say and do what we want to say and do but don't, because of societal norms or self-restraint.
Absolutely, yes. They kill, they maim, they rob, they steal, and these things are what we sometimes are tempted to do, but never would. And the knowing that this is wrong is what makes the characters what they are. This is called the duality of man. The idea that every person has good and evil within them.
Yeah, perhaps that's why there are so many video games where we play as the villain. It allows us to sort of act out and do the things we wouldn't normally do in an environment where there are no consequences for our evil actions.
Absolutely, yes. What's a fantastic example of this? Grand Theft Auto 5. When you play as Trevor, how excited are you? I already know what your answer's going to be. It's very, isn't it? Always. The elephant in the room is that Trevor is a monster, right? You know, but you can't argue against the excitement that players get when they play as him. I mean, how many times you see him blowing things up and you feel that rush, you know? It's because these are things we'd never even considered doing in real life, so this gives us a kind of escapism.
Most definitely.
And this concept is plain as day in A Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the novel by Robert Louis Stevenson.
A well-respected chemist, Dr. Jekyll, working at dark science to bring out his alter ego, Mr. Hyde.
He's an evil man who wrongs almost everyone he comes into contact with.
The book is thought-provoking because it makes us think about our own internal conflict. This may tie into the reason we feel the way we do when a villain has a powerful screen presence.
Absolutely, yeah.
There you are, thief in the shadow.
But of course, the way that these villains make us feel has so much to do with how we interpret them. It's not about what the writers think. The people often decide whether a character works or not. That's not to say that a lot of the credit doesn't go to the performance, the planning, the groundwork. They're the ones who did the work, and we are the ones who decide whether it works or not. There needs to be a balance, you know?
Perfectly balanced. This whole thing should be.
The writers and actors are planning this character, and the harder they work makes it more likely that the character will be accepted by the people.
How many times have we seen a studio or a company undertake such an amazing idea, but it's marred by compromise or just lack of effort?
It's happened a lot. An easy example is Spider-Man 3. Sam Raimi had an existing idea, but the executive said, no, this is what we're going to do. It's obvious during the film that Raimi is still trying to tell his story, all while staying within the guidelines foisted upon him.
That's good.
You know what, Parker? Hey, give me another cookie. Especially aggression. This could be dangerous.
Now, Emperor Palpatine, or Darth Sidious, falls within 3 different categories. He is undoubtedly a monster villain, but since he infiltrated the Republic and rose to Supreme Chancellor, he's also a civilian villain, and because no one saw his betrayal coming, he was a friend to the Jedi for so many years. This also makes him a twist villain. Palpatine is executed so well, and I suppose we could call him a hybrid villain.
A hybrid villain? Now, I really like the sound of that. Now see, the Joker can fall into monster, depending on what adaptation of him you're seeing. But every time he falls into both the civilian and philosophy villain categories, because of his elusiveness and law-breaking nature.
And I thought my jokes were bad.
He would be civilian, but also because some of his arguments make us think. They challenge our current perspectives on society. And while that could be quite unsettling, that just means he's done his job flawlessly and performed his role as philosophy villain to the letter.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No. I am your father.
So, from that last discussion, you're probably thinking, there are so many examples of fantastic execution, but when it goes wrong, the culprit is often creative differences, a lack of budget, and I'm sorry to say this, but a lack of care. So many films suffer because of a lack of time, but so many more characters are put to the sword because of a lack of enthusiasm. The opposite of precision. It's not surgery, it's just a butchery. And now we've hit execution. The way that a villain is executed is so incredibly crucial. You could have a revolutionary story written, and the villain could be the character of the decade. You could be on the cusp of getting your own TV series with the character, but if it's executed poorly, you lose 75% of the flair, and that is fatal to the survival and longevity of your piece.
Have you seen Thor: Love and Thunder? It's not a good film. In fact, it's actually the opposite of a good film. And it still gets me in the heart to see such a talent like Christian Bale wasted like he was here. An actor of this magnitude, and this is what they do with him? It's deeply saddening. That's not to say the villain that Bale played was bad in himself. He's actually really awesome, but it was the poor execution that let him down.
All gods will die.
Gorr the God Butcher on paper is a great philosophy villain, someone who in theory can thematically challenge the protagonist. His goal is to hunt and kill all the gods for their abuse of their power, and our protagonist, Thor, is himself a god, who in this film is somewhat abusing his power. The clearest example is when Thor decimates a city in his attempt to save it. The problem is the film refuses to bring this conflict into focus. In the eyes of the film, Thor is just the good guy and Gorr is just the bad guy. We all know how the story goes. A writer could have a great idea, but in the execution, the idea is lost. How could we execute Gorr better? Seeing as Thor Love and Thunder is more interested in humor, we'll need to nip that in the bud and keep it on the serious side. First of all, the two need more screen time together. We need more than just, oh hey Thor, give me Stormbreaker. No, bye then. And then Gorr loses. Instead, there should be an intense rivalry, with Gorr making his argument to Thor, and in the aftermath, Thor questioning whether Gorr had a point, and wanting to improve himself because of Gorr. Of course, we want to make sure the dialogue is fitting for the scene, and sounds like it's coming from the character and not from the writer, but the thematic conflict would be there. Gorr would leave a mark on Thor and stay with him instead of being a temporary hurdle to jump over, so Gorr can go from being a great philosopher only in concept to also in execution, by both a shift in focus from humor to drama, and by simply having our protagonist and antagonist on screen together more. Sometimes a villain can appear to have the potential to be legendary in advertising, but in the final product can be a complete letdown. What better example is there than Antón Castillo? This is one of those cases that when you hear about it, you think it'll be a home run, but in practice it falls flat on its face. Giancarlo Esposito is doing the best he can, but the script is denying him a great character. Castillo doesn't represent anything. There are themes or philosophies to be explored. He looks ominous, he sounds ominous, but that's it. He never does anything to make you fear or hate him. He's entirely superficial. One of the most frustrating things about his character are the incessant ramblings he likes. This line is especially ridiculous.
Truth or lies?
Truth.
Why would you ask this? He's making an offer that doesn't require any consideration. Or what about this gem?
Before he was El Presidente, mi papa loved to fish. I've caught a very big fish today.
What's he trying to do? Scare us? His demise scene isn't even satisfying. It's dramatic, which is the flowing theme of Antón, but like the rest, it means nothing.
Lies.
Diego! No!
Truly awful. So many villains succeed in their villainy, but as we can see here, unfortunately, many fall short. Kylo Ren is very clearly designed to be like Darth Vader. Vader worked in the original trilogy because he had an arc. At the beginning, he is Darth Vader, second only to the Emperor, a force to be reckoned with. We learn more about who he was in the second film, and that he's not inherently evil, which gets Luke and the audience to think there's a chance he can be saved. And then, in the third film, we see the real Anakin come back, as set up previously. You see how it's well-rounded. So, Kylo Ren is what you would describe as character whiplash. At first, he's a wannabe Vader, speaking intimately to Darth Vader's charred helmet, which apparently wasn't entirely melted in Return of the Jedi. Ugh. But what Abrams had in mind for Ren was for him to be an anti-Vader. He was meant to get more powerful in the dark side as the films progressed, whereas Vader recedes from the dark slowly over the course of the original trilogy. But none of this even comes to pass. We'll never know if that would have worked. So, in the first film, he is only a wannabe Vader. We learn his origin in the second film. Unlike Vader's backstory, where we felt sympathetic and were immersed, with Ren we feel confused and unsympathetic. And the reason for that is twofold, to my mind. First, it's out of character for Luke to draw the conclusion he does about Ren, which essentially boils down to, the dark side is whispering to him, gotta kill him. The second being, Ren's reaction is incredibly disproportionate and outright nonsensical, so he feels that he now needs to amass an army to deal with Luke, and then he just does. Where did he find the First Order? Did he purchase it online? And then, in the third film, he has an epiphany, I guess about his father. Well, I suppose he should be good, actually, and help Rey defeat the real bad guy who also shows up out of nowhere. So basically, in this comparison, Vader works because he's believable and he has a consistent arc. Ren doesn't because he's not believable. He's not sympathetic, and he does whatever the current film tells him to. He doesn't feel like a character, he feels like a puppet, completely at the mercy of the writers. All of this to say, Kylo Ren is executed very poorly. But I remember seeing the posters for The Force Awakens. A new darkside wielder with a triple lightsaber? Now this is going to be cool. No. All garnish, no meat, as Arthur Morgan would say.
So while the execution of your villain has to be held to the highest possible standard, there's one integral aspect that has to be flawless every time, and that is their downfall.
The defeat. A key part of villainy. It's typically the defining moment in your hero's arc. It may be where they come to terms with who they are, or pledge themselves to an ideal or cause larger than themselves. It's where the good guy earns the name. This is the key to the dynamic. The integral part the villain must play to give the story the snap that keeps the audience engaged. The climax of the villain's story should always validate the hero's journey. This is the payoff, the big moment that your hero has been working up to. It needs to leave a mark. And I believe it should always be an edge of the seat moment.
To villain enthusiasts like myself and Damien, sometimes this whole losing part can be a bit of a bummer. But you know, we carry on. When writing a villain with many negative traits, having one of these traits be key to their downfall is a fantastic way to set up a satisfying villain death. A good one to start with is Scar.
Oh, surely we lions are not all that bad.
Who doesn't love The Lion King? It's a movie with 1,000 lessons, wonderful music, and a terrifying villain. Scar was the brother of Mufasa. He lived in Mufasa's shadow his whole life, and because of this, grew into a bitter old lion. He made a pact with the hyenas that stated they help him in his wretched quest to dispose of Mufasa and install himself as king of the Pride Lands. And in return, he allows them free reign, a gift they were never granted from Mufasa, and any prey will now be fair game to themselves. This grew into a fruitful arrangement for the lion's share of the movie, but in time, his treachery grew too great towards the end of the film, and led to one of the most satisfying villain deaths in cinema. The hyenas were already turning on Scar when he couldn't provide food. Then when they heard him sell them out, that nailed his coffin shut. He then died a poetic justice death. He couldn't provide food for his subjects, so they just ate him. Scar went on to become one of cinema's most iconic villains.
As we've explored, a villain can most certainly be the victim of their own villainy. This is very well executed with Norman Osborn from Spider-Man. Green Goblin in the first Spider-Man film is very much what you'd imagine from this iconic character, and Willem Dafoe played him to perfection. His eeriness, his tension, his voice and his mannerisms, and this lends further power to his death, right alongside the tragedy of it. The whole time the Goblin has been around, he's made Spidey's life hell, difficult choices pushing him to his limits. When Peter finally subdues the Goblin and has him beat, Norman reveals himself and plays the victim, claiming he too is a victim of the Goblin. During Peter's disbelief, Norman summons his glider discreetly in case he needs a way out, which he evades because of his spider sense. Norman has a split second to realise what he's done before he's killed by his own trap. He struggles for a moment before accepting his fate, and his last words, spoken very softly and with sincerity, stayed with Peter for the rest of the trilogy.
Peter, don't tell Harry.
Sometimes a villain's death hits very hard, like Norman's did. You could say that the Green Goblin is Spider-Man's Joker, and speaking of, let's visit the Joker from Batman Arkham City. Joker's death in Arkham City is a thematic one, as well as a sad one. Just hours earlier, Hugo Strange confronted Batman with the idea that it's his allowance of supervillains living that creates the environment for them to commit their terrible crimes. We'll keep that idea in mind. When the cure for the Titan poisoning is Joker's only means of survival, he begs Batman for it, a little nervous that he might not give it to him, and for a moment Batman does contemplate whether he should because of all the people Joker's responsible for. Afraid that Batman's not going to save him, Joker ambushes Batman to get him to surrender the cure, but in the struggle the cure is destroyed, along with Joker's last hope for survival. Joker asks Batman if he's satisfied, and Batman reveals to Joker that in spite of everything he's done, he would have saved him. Joker then responds with the iconic line,
That actually is pretty funny.
and dies laughing. The reason this death is a tragic one is because Joker worried for a moment that he might have pushed Batman too far, and that this time he won't save him, and in his fear, he destroyed his shot at survival himself. And the reason this death is a thematic one is because, in Batman realizing he would have saved Joker, he now has to confront the idea that Hugo Strange is right about him.
When a villain is exceptionally hateable, sometimes their deaths can be explosive as their life, but sometimes, even when executed to the best possible standard, the villain's deeds in life were too foul for even the most heinous deaths to be enough. Let's visit the death of Joffrey Baratheon. King Joffrey's death is a gruesome one. Throughout Westeros, they called this event the Purple Wedding. Can you tell why? While all villains are meant to feel like they deserve the punishment they ultimately receive, it's quite a rare thing that the audience actually wish they suffered more. I mean, Joffrey choked to death in a gut-wrenching struggle for air, drenching his finery in vomit and blood, a display that lasted a brutal 70 seconds, and still, fans don't think it was anywhere near long enough. How evil does a character have to be to deserve such hatred from the fans? Well, to put it plainly, Joffrey more than deserved the dreadful death that befell him, and no, it wasn't long enough. This guy liked to shoot hookers with crossbows as a fun pastime, and that was when he was feeling benevolent. But see, what caused Joffrey's death was his unimaginable cruelty. Olenna Tyrell infused his wine with the Strangler, because she couldn't bear the thought of her granddaughter staying married to such a monster. Joffrey's bloodthirsty nature was his downfall. This is what makes his death so incredibly spectacular. He was the most hated king in the Seven Kingdoms, and I think choking on his innards is a great way to bring an end to his savagery. Great writing, great villain, an incredibly satisfying death.
Joffrey!
Come with me now.
Joffrey!
If you want to leave, you have to leave.
Don't touch Joffrey!
Poisoned my son, your king. Take him. Take him! Take him! Take him!
A villain can go out as a monster, like Joffrey, but sometimes they will go out with a monologue, covering why they do what they do, and why their reasons are just.
Where are you, Charles?
Gone.
Come now. You cannot hope to match me, Connor. For all your skills, you are still but a boy, with so much left to learn. Give me Lee! Impossible. He is the promise of a better future. The sheep need a shepherd.
He has been dismissed and censured. He can do nothing for you now.
A temporary setback. He will be restored.
Haytham's death is tragic because it comes from his own progeny. Being related, you'd assume that Haytham and Connor would stand under the same banner. They both want the same goal, but their methods are what determine their opposition. When their conflict reaches boiling point, it resulted in Haytham surprising Connor in Boston. After exchanging their opposing ideals, the fight was interrupted by oncoming debris from cannon fire. Both Haytham and Connor were blasted, and in the aftermath, Connor desperately tries to subdue his father.
Brave words from a man about to die.
It's this moment where it's cemented that these two characters will never see eye to eye. We see that Haytham's ideals are so unbreakable that he is willing to strangle his only son to death for them. Haytham speaks his uncompromising belief one last time.
Still we rise again, and do you know why? It's because the Order is born of a realization. We require no creed, no indoctrination by desperate old men. All we need is that the world be as it is. And this is why the Templars will never be destroyed.
It's at this point in the father-son dynamic that we're expecting some kind of reconciliation, and I was wrong about you, son, type of exchange. We get nothing of the sort. Instead, Haytham firmly stands with his cause and offers no apology, Connor offering none of his own.
Don't think I have any intention of caressing your cheek and saying I was wrong.
I will not weep and wonder what might have been. I'm sure you understand. Still, I'm proud of you in a way. You've shown great conviction, strength, courage. All noble qualities. I should have killed you long ago.
And with his death, the Grand Master of the Colonial Rite is no more. Connor says farewell in his native language, and leaves bruised and bloody. Even in death, the philosophy villain will never shy away from their purpose, Haytham most of all.
Sometimes, when there is a lot of darkness inside of a villain, it will flow out at the moment of their death, showing their truest nature in their final moments. Exploiting the good traits of a hero is a particularly low one, and this makes me think of Koba from Dawn of the Planet of the Apes.
Caesar, God. Apes, follow. Koba, no.
Koba took it upon himself to exact his own form of cruel vengeance on what he thought were the last remaining humans, because to Koba, all humans are evil. It started when he tricked the two stooges into believing he was a dunce, and ended up killing them both with their own gun in a horrifying display of malice. Just look at that face. He was at odds with Caesar about how to handle the humans, and the other apes knew this. So to have the rest of the apes behind him, he had to kill Caesar and frame the humans for his murder. And so he commits to the plan. Gary Oldman's character, Dreyfus, one of our suspected villains, sacrifices himself in a nasty explosion, disturbing the apes brawl at the top. It's then when Caesar tackles him, resulting in the twisted bonobo hanging from a fatal wire. This is where his audacity reaches its peak. As he hangs at Caesar's mercy, he utters the sacred words.
Ape. Not kill. Ape.
It's then when Caesar realised what Koba has become, and what he must do to protect his kind.
You are not ape.
You can imagine that his death was incredibly gruesome, seeing as we don't see anything, but we hear the guttural screams and the clashing of metal at the bottom. Koba died a satisfying death because he showed his hand when he tried to murder Caesar, and after that, Caesar knew the only way to keep the apes safe and away from war is by removing Koba. Any residual feelings of care for him were gone. Caesar didn't enjoy killing Koba, but it was necessary. Another massive shift in Caesar's arc.
All these deaths are pleasing to the audience. They give us a sense of reward because the characters are undone by their own villainy, but they aren't cliché either. The definition of cliché is lack of originality or inspiration, but they are nonetheless commonplace throughout cinema.
Now, cliché doesn't mean dissatisfying. There are many different clichés. It doesn't always mean your villain has to have a long nose, they don't need to rub their hands together and have a textbook evil laugh, and it doesn't mean they need a spinning chair. Sometimes, a compelling cliché can be as simple as a handlebar moustache. Aesthetics will assist your villain, but the bedrock that will support them is the core of their character and contrast to the hero. Now, even if something is cliché, despite the stigma around the word, that doesn't automatically make it ineffective. Voldemort dies because Harry kills him. A young Hogwarts student overpowered a dark, foreboding wizard. It almost seems unlikely, but what made it work was that for the majority of the films, Harry was on the back foot. Voldemort made him work for the win, and there was a lot of loss along the way. Cedric Diggory, Fred Weasley, Albus Dumbledore, Severus Snape. But with the help of Dumbledore in his lowest moment, literally his lowest moment, he was dead, he used some critical thinking and managed to outsmart Voldemort, righting so many wrongs. Cliché, but not poor.
I think I'd take something that was cliché over a subversion of expectations. Sometimes when a writer tries to get too clever, they leave logic out of the equation. We could call this an anti-cliché. The Last Jedi is a great example of that. Rian Johnson wanted this film to be different from the rest, but what we get doesn't end up leading to anything coherent. Let's pretend Rise of Skywalker didn't happen for a moment. Snoke's death leaves us with a character that didn't get to be a character. The Force Awakens builds him up to be this massive, ominous threat. but is ultimately killed by his underling. So the writer sits back in their chair and says, "Ha! You didn't see that coming, did you?" We then reply with, "No, because it didn't make sense." This sense of mystery that came with Snoke was a massive part of him, and could have been utilized to turn him into something very unique and creative. We all know that the original plan clearly didn't have Snoke die in The Last Jedi. Abrams had to desperately explain who he was, and what we got was that he was a decoy all along. It's embarrassingly weak. I don't think I've met anyone who enjoys the sequels, but the potential was really something, and it was sadly squandered by an attempt to subvert expectations that ultimately lacked direction.
At least with a cliché, it's not original, but it is coherent. Consistency is so key. Plot twists and subversions are good and can most certainly enhance your villain, as long as there's no breach of logic. The Green Goblin died by his own evil machinations. This is a cliché, but it works. Darth Vader died getting his own back on his tormentor. This is a cliché, but it works. Ramsay Bolton died in the very jaws of his own dogs. This is a cliché, but it works. But even a cliché can fall short if the setup is wrong. So your hero has this tragic backstory all set up. Maybe your knight in shining armor lost his family at the hands of the villain. But the problem is the audience doesn't care. Maybe they haven't spent enough time with the family, or maybe they just don't know who the family is. Reva from Obi-Wan Kenobi lost her fellow younglings to Vader during Order 66, and she's been on a revenge mission for years, rising through the ranks of the Inquisitors. But there's no backstory at all, just one flashback, which hardly serves as groundwork. So we don't end up caring about Reva or her motivation.
The Last of Us Part 2 is another great example of a story that tried to stray from cliché, but in my opinion, hurt the final result. There was a big commotion over Joel's death. It could have happened this way or should have happened that way. I think the biggest reason for the uproar is that Joel went out very unceremoniously. Ultimately, his death serves to be a setup for this second story, and that to many doesn't feel like a respectful send-off to a beloved character. Many have argued that Joel's death would have worked better had he gone out in a sacrifice for Ellie, and when you say it like that, it does sound cliché, but it would have been true to his character.
So the takeaway is that clichés are not inherently flawed. There have been times where something's been cliché and audiences have loved them. There have also been times where the viewer will turn their nose up at a cliché. They either work or they don't, depending on the groundwork put into them.
So, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about these different villains, but what's the point? Well, we now understand the difference between all these villains. Maybe now you're thinking what sort of villain you want for your story.
Is it a Breaking Bad, where the villain wins? Is it complex, simple? Is it heartbreaking, wholesome? Well, your villain will need to complement this. We said earlier that monster villains are usually safe for epic stories, because for what they may lack in nuance or complexity, they make up for in screen presence. Maybe they're not the most thought-provoking, but they are captivating and thrilling.
In smaller scale stories, the villains usually aren't as flashy, but they often have something going for them, whether it's an interesting philosophy or an eyebrow-raising opposition to our hero. So if it's a bigger story, more epic, you'll probably need a monster villain for that one. If it's more down to earth, then perhaps a more narrative villain would be best to chew on. However, these rules aren't absolute. Darth Vader is both a thought-provoking villain and a grand one.
We introduced you to this earlier, and that is how a villain can fall into multiple categories. Well, we're going to go into more detail now.
A man who is both a civilian villain and a philosophy villain, in some stories even a monster villain. One of the Joker's best moments in anything is when he's explaining his philosophy to Batman in The Dark Knight. As he says in the film, "You see, I'm not a monster, I'm just ahead of the curve." His point being, through our lens, everything he's done makes him a monster, but he believes the rest of Gotham aren't that far behind him, stating they'll follow the rules until it's inconvenient. Monster villains are malicious, and provide very little thought to anyone but themselves, but they can cross over into philosophy villain. It's a fairly rare occurrence, but it can happen. If a monster villain is capable of thinking things through clearly, without the narcissistic notions of superiority, there may be a chance for the viewer to understand. But similar to other categories, none of this excuses their actions. Thanos. It's a fairly simple philosophy, but a philosophy nonetheless. To Thanos, everything he's doing is for the good of the universe. He knows he's hated for it, but he still does it because he believes it's right.
This villain features in the Dragonborn DLC of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, and his name is Miraak. He was the first ever Dragonborn, and walked the earth during the Merethic era, the time before history. He was a dragon priest, and just like the rest of them, served Alduin. That was until one day, when he discovered he was Dragonborn.
You have no idea of the true power a Dragonborn can wield. This realm is beyond. You have no power here. And it is only a matter of time before Solstheim is also mine. I already control the minds of its people. Soon they will finish building my temple, and I can return home. Send him back where he came from. He can await my arrival with the rest of Tamriel.
Now here is an example of fantastic advertising coupled with a villain that can deliver. This is Miraak, Allegiance Guide in the Dragon Tongue, the dark mirror for the last Dragonborn. A dragon priest who discovered he was Dragonborn and turned against the dragons. Then, a very loyal member of the Dragon Priests, Valok, came to blows with Miraak over his betrayal. They fought in a legendary battle of such epic proportions that they split off an entire chunk of northern Skyrim, creating a huge island that would later become Solstheim. Miraak fell short in this fight, however, but just before he could be vanquished by Valok, Hermaeus Mora saved him, trapping Miraak in Apocrypha, Mora's realm of oblivion. This is where Miraak spent over 5,000 years in servitude to Mora. This desire for freedom allows the viewer to understand him far deeper, but his sadistic crimes when he walked the earth, with seemingly no cause behind them, further distance him from the philosophy villain category. You could make the argument that he's a philosophy villain because he speaks to that side of us that can't help but sympathise, but mainly he would fall into the monster and civilian villain category. I think what Miraak truly fears is being forgotten. He wants to carve his legacy into the world, and for that to work, he can't afford to return and have no one remember his name, and more importantly, fear it. But they do fear it. He has a very ominous and mysterious introduction. Everyone who hears his name seems to quake with fear, and some even begin to feel nauseous. Just have a look at some of this dialogue.
No, wait. Maybe. I don't know how I know that name. I'm not sure. I don't want to talk about this.
Did I know someone by that name? Someone that wanted something. Maybe I'm just confused. I can't be sure.
No, wait. I recognize the name, but I'm not sure why. I don't know. I feel strange just thinking about it. A temple, maybe. Here on the island, something about a temple?
Miraak's story is a dark one, and with a tragic end. He represents the Dragonborn if the player had chosen a different path, a darker one. And this is one of the most amazing things a villain can do. Challenge the hero, and at the same time, the viewer. And these pressing fears about being forgotten, they're very human fears. Human-style fears are relatable, and relatability helps a villain enter the civilian category. He's ominous, imposing, sadistic, thought-provoking, and this is why Miraak is a fantastic candidate for the multi-category villains.
Miraak has some relatability, but this doesn't make him a philosophy villain. He doesn't have a belief or a code, he just has a desire to be free. The philosophy villains are the ones who, to a certain extent, are right, but emphasis on a certain extent.
But there are villains who think the same thing, but are obviously wrong. They're deluded and often blinded by power. People like Odin from God of War Ragnarok and the High Evolutionary.
If there's a more egotistical Marvel villain, I'd love to see it. Or actually, no, I don't think I really would.
Yeah, not me neither.
This man has such a capacity for evil. Just look at what he did to poor old Lila, Teefs, Rocket and Floor, and countless other animals in the facility. This man is undoubtedly a monster villain who tries to fall into the philosophy category. The only thing that lets him down is the primary decider for that category of villain, the relatability, which, for this guy, is at absolute zero. But it's the belief he holds in his way of life that could potentially make him a contender for something other than monster. He doesn't quite succeed, mind, but his passion is something worthy of note.
He has to be on the top 5 smartest MCU characters list.
Absolutely. I mean, the guy's intellect knows no bounds.
He's also not afraid to make mistakes. Besides his temper, he is okay with failure.
I learned my lessons. I aimed some small part of my mental capacity back in my own direction, and now gravity itself serves my whims.
This can make for a truly formidable opponent. Their willingness to go slow in order to achieve their overarching goal. I'd say the High Evolutionary exceeds Monster Villain. He is also there in the civilian category too. Admittedly, it's hard to assign an extra category to this man. But if there was an animal abusing piece of crap category, he'd be sitting on his rightful throne atop that list. The reason he would be in the civilian category is because of how reminiscent he is of abusive human beings that regrettably walk our streets today. The hatred felt by the viewer in response to Herbert's torture is like no other. This is what would set him aside from that of Voldemort or Darth Sidious, because it may bring to mind the mistreatment of animals that unfortunately may be something that you or I have been witness to in our real lives. What a dangerous man.
Incinerate them.
Let's now visit Odin, Allfather, the High One, Lord of the Hanged, King of the Aesir. He's fantastic in many adaptations. We're not going to mention Marvels for today, bit of a pushover there. The one we do want to focus on is the PlayStation exclusive God of War Ragnarok.
You know who I am? Back before winter set in, there were some misunderstandings. Regrettable ones. But I think we all have a better idea of who we're dealing with. Now, what you did to his boys. Self-defense. Dying is what we Aesir live for. And let's be honest, they were kinda useless. But Baldur, he had value. He was my best tracker, my closer. Yeah, his mind was gone, sure. But he had his uses and now he's gone because of you. You follow me?
This Odin is a master of deception and a vessel for suffering. Something in these games that made his villainy particularly effective was the build-up of lore and stories for his legend. We know who we're dealing with. This is someone who isn't to be taken lightly. When we first meet him in Midgard, he is everything we thought he'd be. He's imposing, commanding, and while possessing a certain calmness and never losing his temper, he makes it clear he's the one who's in control. And when our protagonists enter his domain, Asgard, his demeanor changes from that of commanding and dominating to that of the welcoming and hospitable, opening up his home because he needs Loki, so he makes it clear that Loki is valuable. However, these are all manipulation tactics. His cruel nature is often masked by a friendly face. Odin's knowledge of how to leverage people, what they want and what they seek is easily his greatest weapon. Atreus knows full well of all the terrible things Odin has done, but he still comes close to falling for his mind games because of how convincing his empathy and interest is. Richard Schiff did a fantastic job as Odin. It's very difficult to imagine someone else playing him in that game. This casting choice complements the character so well.
When writing a villain, a very important factor to keep in mind is casting. If I were to approach you and say, hey, I'm writing a show, and the villain is a Russian military veteran turned mobster with a scar on his face and a knack for torture, and I can already see the actor, yes, it has to be Seth Rogen. You'd look at me as if I had gone loopy, and with good reason. Casting is critical. It determines who will be the one to bear the mantle of your vision and bring it to life. It's a process that should absolutely be treated with the utmost respect. Now, in a lot of animated movies and older video games, we have voice actors. Now, with them, you can afford to be a little bit more lenient, but not too much. A character's voice is still an integral part of them. So when we consider casting, a good exercise is to picture a well-known character. For example, let's take Gus Fring. Would he work without Giancarlo Esposito, do you think? Probably not. I mean, someone else would definitely be able to play a drug lord disguised as a franchise owner, for sure. But it just wouldn't be the same Gus without Esposito. So let me ask you this. Do you think this applies to all cases? Would the villain work without the actor?
Oh, would you hold this? For just a moment, I want to get a little picture right into the camera. There we are. Awesome.
There's a common question on the internet. Would pagan men have worked without Troy Baker? A lot of people believe the answer is no, because of how elegantly Baker conducted pagans' charisma and control. Confident but not arrogant, expressive but not over the top, refined but not condescending. What other actor could have done this? There may have been others, absolutely, but there's no doubt that it wouldn't have been the same without Baker. Once a character becomes iconic and beloved, the actor becomes integral to that role.
Think about a recasting. Any that come to your mind. It's jarring, isn't it? Mads Mikkelsen replaced Johnny Depp as Grindelwald, and the studio tried to sweep it under the carpet. It's clear they'd like to pretend it never happened. Real-world logistics can affect casting. We don't want to talk about this, but we are tried and true, so we must. Jonathan Majors. A great actor with a bad rep. So bad, in fact, that it killed Kang before the Avengers could. Kang the Conqueror is a fantastic character. In the comics, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created him to be one of those seemingly down-to-earth characters with a brilliant mind. A Tony Stark, if you will. He's initially a Fantastic Four villain, who would go on to be a multiversal threat, challenging all heroes in Marvel.
He's an egomaniac, replacing landmarks throughout history with his face wherever he goes, because what Kang touches, he claims. Kang the Conqueror. The guy is absolutely terrifying, and deserves the utmost respect throughout the world of villainy. It's near impossible to outmaneuver him. Even if you do, his variance will ensure that your efforts are in vain. This renders him essentially immortal. He's not so much a man, he's more of an entity.
Imagine bringing a character of this caliber to the big screen. It sounds like it could move mountains, but unfortunately, this was all undone by an actor's life choices and a studio's incompetence. In Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, Kang, with all of his knowledge and power, met his demise at the hands of large ants. The whole prospect of Kang in that film was unnecessary. We say this because we both firmly agree that Kang should have been a Guardians Volume 1 Thanos, looming overhead and not being a big part of it. MODOK was Darren Cross, as bizarre and ridiculous as it turned out to be. He had a history with the Pims, and he didn't fully die at the end of Ant-Man, so why wasn't he the main focus? Well, look, the writers just got too eager. They couldn't wait to use Kang. He was meant for so much more, but idiocy got in the way. And now, the potential for Kang on the big screen may forever go unmet.
Could another actor take over as Kang? Potentially. But unfortunately, there is now a stigma to his name, one that won't soon go away. Marvel can't afford to wait, so now Robert Downey Jr. steps in as Doctor Doom. How will it go? We're hoping it goes well, but only time will tell.
We made a reference to Guardians 1 Thanos a moment ago. Well, that was actually the first scene with Josh Brolin. In the Avengers post-credit scene, Thanos was played by Damien Poitier. But thanks to obscured angles and lighting, the untrained eye will see this as the same actor. It's easier to recast under these circumstances. We often make the assumption that a character will only work with a specific actor, but it's been proven manyfold that it can work with a different talent. A shining example is Gollum. I'd wager most people would argue Gollum wouldn't work without Andy Serkis because of how iconic Serkis's performance became. But Gollum worked just as well with Liam O'Brien, the actor who played him in the Middle-earth games.
Think you could sneak up on me so easily, eh?
What does he know of it?
When I was playing Shadow of Mordor, I thought there are times where it doesn't quite sound like Serkis, but it was still incredibly convincing.
What usually stings most about a bad villain is a wasted actor. Christopher Eccleston is a magnificent actor and was wasted on such a boring Malekith. If you didn't have ambitious plans for a villain, why cast an actor of such magnitude? It's such a waste. Christopher Eccleston played the Ninth Doctor and was fantastic in that role. He had a lot of great lines and embodied the Doctor perfectly. Unfortunately, the MCU proved incapable of utilizing his talent. I mean, if you have to introduce yourself the moment you walk onto frame, it's obvious you're not very scary.
I think Christopher Eccleston would have worked fantastically as a civilian villain in the MCU. I think the role would have fit him like a glove. If the writers had any trace of common sense, they would see to it that Eccleston is cherished and put to good use. He's a marvellous actor and should be treated as such. But instead we're burdened with this.
I am Malekith, and I would have what is mine.
Alright, that's enough of that villain. I actually feel quite drowsy just looking at him. Let's instead talk about Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor.
I don't hate the sinner. I hate the sin.
10 seconds to end.
And yours, my friend, is existing.
8.
I cannot let you win. I gave the bat a fighting chance to do it, but he was not strong enough.
4.
So, if man won't kill God,
2. 1.
the devil will do it.
Just like Eccleston, an amazing actor, very captivating. But why was he Lex Luthor? I'm not entirely sure this choice was just. Eisenberg is known for a more fidgety role. Columbus in Zombieland, J. Daniel Atlas in Now You See Me, Zuckerberg in The Social Network. He always plays the smart but high-energy roles. Seeing as Lex Luthor is known for being deliberate and methodical, you can see how this casting choice would ruffle some feathers. But still, lots of people were happy with Eisenberg's Luthor, so this would lend credence to the character, in the sense that maybe he wasn't the worst choice. But he was still quite far from what people wanted. He would have been a great Lex in an origin story, however.
Jared Leto tried to play the Joker. He gave it a shot, but unfortunately something just wasn't working. I think what we've got here in the case of Eisenberg as Luthor and Leto as the Joker is amazing actors who admittedly might not have been the first choice, but it could have been something special. It could have been amazing with the right direction. But unfortunately, they just didn't have that. They were let down by poor dialogue and overemphasis. But Eisenberg as Luthor and Leto as Joker overcooked it in the energy department. They were both too exaggerated and over the top to be intimidating. It feels like they're trying too hard.
Jared Leto isn't a bad actor. He was just a bad pick. Not any actor can play any role, and this shows with his Joker. I'm sorry to say it, but I'm just not scared of him. And fear is the Joker's main attraction. What does this tell you about this casting choice? It tells you it's misguided, and most probably a rushed decision.
You need to plan casting. You can't just rush into it. You need to be methodical and take your time. Eccleston was given the role of Malekith, and in terms of acting, knocked it out of the park like always. But the studio didn't seem to understand that the writing needs to accommodate the actor, put the effort in, and give the villain substance so the actor has clay to mold. For a villain to be satisfying, the viewer must be scared of them, or at the very least be able to buy into them as a threat.
Fear factor is vital in the world of villainy.
Now, of course, there's great importance in the way you want your villain to look. What kind of villain they're going to be. Are they going to speak 1,000 words without speaking at all? Or do they need to open their mouths first? Darth Maul said a lot without saying anything. George Lucas wanted him to scream villain, and he does. The horns, the angular tattoos, the blatant use of the color red, the Sith eyes, it all works so well. Lots of villains share this. The Joker, Emperor Palpatine, Thanos, Davy Jones, the Night King, Azog the Defiler, the Alien, Darth Vader, Darkseid, Jason Voorhees. All these villains are frightening to look at. The dread we feel when Jason takes another life, it's horrifying, but we can't look away. When the viewer is scared of the villain, it hammers the point home.
Leave us.
No, you stay here. I'm in charge.
Do you feel in charge?
Another amazing villain appearance is Kraven from Spider-Man 2. Everything about this man's aesthetic adds to his menace. We'll start with the simple stuff. His tall and large stature, which makes him overbearing, his outfit adorned with keepsakes and trophies of legendary predators, the scars across his face signaling he's come close to death before, but has ultimately prevailed. These qualities tell a story on their own. Then there's the more subtle stuff, like the weight of his footsteps. There's a slight thud to them in quieter scenes, connoting this man's strength. And then there's the confidence in his posture and movements. Everything he does is so calculated and precise. All his movements are very deliberate. He's in complete control of himself and his situation, an imposing villain for sure, and all this before he speaks. Heath Ledger's Joker is imposing with a capital I. Everything about his voice, tone, and facial mannerisms. He seems so dangerously unhinged, to the point where he even seems inhuman. The things he finds funny, most people find horrific.
How about a magic trick? I'm gonna make this pencil disappear. It's gone.
One of his intellectual points in the film is hypocrisy. He says things like people only react to violence when it wasn't planned.
If tomorrow I tell the press that, like, a gangbanger will get shot, or a truckload of soldiers will be blowing up, nobody panics. Because it's all part of the plan. But when I say that one little old mare will die, well, then everyone loses their minds.
He foists the same dread his victims feel upon you. His unorthodox sense of fashion shows he's far removed from societal norms. He couldn't care less about what the rest of the world thinks. In fact, he sees himself as the messiah for his own ideal. Not to mention the scars.
You wanna know how I got these scars?
The fundamental element to these scars is the mystery. How did he get them? He tells two different stories. The first is that his father was drunk one night. The second is that his wife was scarred, so he gave himself his. All of this creates the perfect cocktail for imposition. An undeniably dangerous man, with thought-provoking ideals and a creepy gimmick to tie it all together. Then there are the villains that look friendly, or at least non-threatening, until they speak. Then it's revealed you're not safe at all, like with Lalo Salamanca. Lalo. This guy is really good at making the audience uncomfortable, all while somehow having fantastic hospitality. The way he dresses shows that he has money and style. I'm not entirely sure about the blue moccasins, but anyway. He's also a master of communicating without speech, as shown here when he's in the diner with Nacho discussing Crazy 8.
You worried about him?
The way Lalo's eyes widen here shows that he is asking Nacho a question right back, but his presence denies the need for dialogue. Then Nacho attempts to reassure him.
No, man, he'll keep his mouth shut.
Somehow, a character says,
"It's gonna be like I'm not even here,"
and completely takes over. Probably because he never states that he's taking over. People know of his rep. He shows up in town, imposes his presence, and people fall in line. No demands needed. He's not like the rest of his family. Impulsive, predictable, sloppy. He's precise, surgical, calculated.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Now we've got the pleasantries out of the way, please leave my house.
Your house?
Yes, didn't you see the peacock on the front door? Ah, there you are, soothsayer. It seems your fortune-telling skills are not as good as you thought.
We shall see, Shen.
Oh, you shall see, old goat. Where were we?
We could apply this to Lord Shen from Kung Fu Panda 2. In his introduction, Shen is seemingly harmless until he reveals he has a lot more under his sleeve. He's exemplar of the type of villain who attempts to be polite at first, but is ultimately out for himself. He made Poe's life hell, and continued to do so until his demise.
Yes? You'd like to invite me in? Absolutely.
Honey? Who's this?
I'm going to be your guest here indefinitely. You'll be delighted.
Great. Enjoy the view.
I intend to.
Jessica Jones is a great show, with a creepy villain. Kilgrave is the kind of man who makes your stomach turn. Never before have you seen a more invasive villain. I mean, this is the first thing you see of him. Which is a trauma flashback. The mark he left on Jessica is entirely apparent from out the gate. Just think, there's an entire support group built solely around Kilgrave's victims. Because he doesn't have a grand plan, or a big scheme. He just does what he wants when he wants. And the things he wants are often utterly reprehensible. The amount of people he's violated with his ability, and how he's abused them, will fuel a hatred for him. What's undoubtedly scariest about Kilgrave is his power through words. His power isn't flashy or flamboyant in the slightest. It's subtle, almost imperceptible. The ability to completely remove power and will from someone with just a few words. Horrifying. And this is an incredibly effective way to instill fear, all while staying outside of the scary monster villain parameters. All of these villains demand the audience's attention, sometimes at the cost of comfort. But to make a villain, that's the price that needs to be paid. You don't smile when you see Davy Jones stagger across the deck of the Flying Dutchman. You're not hopeful when you have to watch Darth Vader crush the neck of a poor rebel. We don't find it pleasant when the Joker shoves a pencil through a man's face. We're always scared. These villains are all consistent and stay true to their makeup. The writers knew what they were doing throughout all of these characters, and there's no breach in consistency. Sometimes it can feel like the writers just get bored of their current course and just fancy a change. But you can't do this without setup. Groundwork. I've heard writers try to cover up bad writing by saying things like, yeah, but he's irrational, isn't he? But there has to be a reason for irrationality. Heat of the moment, some kind of setback. You can't just do what you want. And this brings us to consistency.
Consistency is key to the development of a villain. When change comes about, it requires a solid foundation of logic that convinces the audience. If change comes out of left field, it leaves the villain feeling arbitrary. The path to change is a series of small steps and not a couple of giant leaps.
Knowledge is power.
Seize him. Cut his throat. Stop. Wait. I've changed my mind. Let him go. Step back 3 paces. Turn around. Close your eyes. Power is power.
If you want your character to stick with people and not frustrate the audience, put a bunch of little changes in front of one another until your character is different, like with Walter White. It is not okay to randomly decide your character fancies switching things up. It's unlike reality. Things like this don't happen. This will uproot all the work that has been done and leave a bad taste in the viewer's mouth. Who wants that?
You also can't turn a respectable character into a villain in an instant, like with Daenerys Targaryen, who promises Tyrion that she would cease her attack on King's Landing when the bells ring. And at this point, we believe her completely, because she's given us no reason to think otherwise. She's always been true to her word. However, when the bells do start ringing, she, for some godforsaken reason, turns into a homicidal lunatic on the back of Drogon. There was zero build-up, zero groundwork, zero development. It's kind of like stubbing your toe, a sudden and nasty shock. I, and I'm sure I can speak for many others here as well, loved Daenerys. Her values were so stalwart, and she was good to her people, a genuine role model to the people of Essos. Daenerys the true. So, to have this happen out of literally nowhere is so unfair and disrespectful to such a loyal and dedicated fanbase.
I feel like Tyrion and Varys spoke about her madness briefly, once at Dragonstone, but that hardly justifies the absolute nonsensical decision to have her abruptly decimate a city after they surrendered, no less. But this sequence of events in the episode also leads to the inevitable showdown between Sandor and Gregor Clegane, the Hound versus the Mountain.
Yeah, that's you. That's what you've always been.
And this was entertaining, and a nice way to end these two characters, consistent and fulfilling. So in essence, change doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual and not one big leap. A wise man once said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. It sure as hell doesn't start at the 1,000-mile mark.
There are many examples of inconsistency in the world of villainy. One in particular we want to talk about is Abby from The Last of Us Part 2. I can't help but feel The Last of Us is confused as to who exactly Abby is. She has extreme high and low characteristics that seem to conflict with one another. Sometimes she's merciful enough to put her life at risk for people she's never met, and sometimes she's merciless enough to prolong the suffering of people she's never met. You can see where I'm going with this. The arc that was given to Abby in the latter portion of the game, in my opinion, was a strange one, because it doesn't really resolve or expand on what happened in the first half of the game. You never get the impression that the second half of the story happens because of the first half. It feels more like they're happening in spite of each other. She's both a savior and a tormentor, and there's no explanation as to why she has such conflicting characteristics. These inconsistent actions make her feel less genuine. A crowning example is when she was about to commit to Dina's murder. While Abby has her subdued, Ellie pleads for her life, stating that she's pregnant. All Abby says in response is good, about to cut her throat before being stopped by her new companion. It was only when someone she cares about asks her to stop that she did. Hours earlier, the same companion was a member of the rival faction she and her group had spent the last few years of their life fighting. It seems like she saved his life because he saved hers, but this seems as though it cannot be. Earlier in the game, Joel saved Abby's life and she rained hell on him. Now we know Joel did kill Abby's father, but moments earlier, he saved Abby's life. So what could have been an interesting conflict is instead reduced to an action starved of nuance.
You've got to give credit to Laura Bailey though. I mean, she won the award for the game. She's incredible in almost everything she's in. Just look at her work as Serana. But unfortunately, in the case of Abby, it's an incredible performance for a less than incredible character. Less of a person in her own right and more of a vessel for the writers. Not what you want. So when we get back to saving her companion, it feels devoid of meaning. It feels contradictory. I think it would have been so much more interesting if Abby had to confront the idea that she had been building up Joel for years as the killer of her dad, but when she finally meets him, he saves her life. So now she has to confront the idea that maybe he's not a monster, but I feel like the game really breezes past that.
If that's not the story they wanted to tell, I think that's a major mistake in the setup for her character. Abby had such potential to be something interesting, but it was marred by the inconsistency of her actions, in turn leading to a confusing and ineffective villain. It's a shame, but here we are.
Lots of characters suffer from this. Abby, Kylo Ren, Daenerys Targaryen in the last episodes. Now she was a fantastic character throughout the majority, but the writers just wanted to go in a different direction, so we had to deal with it.
And her demise scene was so anticlimactic. It is true the Targaryens are known for their madness, but throughout the 8 seasons, Daenerys never showed signs of this. This sudden change in her character is a shock to the audience, but not for the right reasons, an unearned plot twist.
The moment of a villain's demise doesn't always require spectacle or brutality. Sometimes it can be as simple as a thought-provoking conversation with the hero during the villain's final moments. And these exchanges can sometimes alter the viewer's perspective on the matter. For example, Eric Killmonger's final words in Black Panther are, "Just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors who jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage." It's a powerful line, and it helps the audience understand that this is a man who, at his core, values his heritage above all else. And these are our heartfelt final moments.
My father is many things. A liar is not one of them.
Thank you, daughter. Perhaps I treated you too harshly.
What? What did you do?
I went for the head.
We have some examples lined up here for you, starting with Harry Osborn's death in Spider-Man 3. This moment between Peter and Harry gets me in the heart. Despite his many bad deeds, the viewer is left with a fondness, a moment of relief. They sit with Peter and reflect on what Harry represented, a true friend to Spider-Man. The last thing he does with his life is sacrifice it to save his friends. It's a parallel to his father's death. They're both killed by their gliders. One died because he gave into his darkness, the other because he rose above it. I also want to mention how nice it was to see Flash at Harry's funeral, being Peter's school bully and everything. It's nice to see that he's matured some.
Simple things like that can speak 1,000 words. How about when Darth Vader finally destroyed Sidious and had a few moments with his son, the defining moment in Anakin's life, the final phase where he finally outgrows his captivity that he sadly spent his whole life trapped in. When Luke removes his helmet and looks upon his father, he's not repulsed by the scars of Anakin's past. He's not planning to take this moment to point out where Vader went wrong. The only thing he feels is joy. Joy to be with his father in the here and now. A moment that surely felt as if it lasted a lifetime. When Anakin speaks his final words to Luke, we come to terms with who he really is, and that he was never the villain we experienced.
No, you're coming with me. I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you.
You already have. Look, you were right. You were right about me. Tell your sister you were right.
Father. I won't leave you.
He died a legend's death and will be remembered as such.
I'd like to mention a particular philosophy villain here, because this villain in particular fits this segment very well. This villain isn't necessarily deserving of our sympathy, but rather our respect. Ultron. James Spader did such a remarkable job with this villain. Everything he says is gold, and he's a real threat to Earth.
Purge me from your computers, turn my own flesh against me. It means nothing. When the dust settles, the only thing living in this world will be metal.
At the time of his defeat, Ultron had been burnt out of the net, so he couldn't escape through there. And all of his prime forms had been destroyed, and all but one of his subforms had been vanquished. And this last remnant was already falling apart. What makes the downfall of this villain so gripping is the conversation between him and Vision in his final moments. Now, Vision was also created by Stark, and he became the most selfless hero in the Avengers. This is telling us that it's all a matter of perspective. The back and forth is perfectly written and, in my opinion, the best interaction in the whole MCU. It's a blatant case of optimist versus pessimist, and it works so well.
You're afraid.
Of you.
Of death. You're the last one.
You were supposed to be the last. Stark asked for a savior and settled for a slave.
I suppose we are both disappointments.
I suppose we are.
Humans are odd. They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be. But there is grace in their failings. I think you missed that.
They're doomed.
Yes. But a thing isn't beautiful because it lasts. It's a privilege to be among them.
You're unbearably naive.
Well, I was born yesterday.
Davy Jones. For what it's worth, he wasn't the worst person in the world. He was broken by love and turned bitter. He desired to live, even though he was bound to a wretched life. It was the only life he had. When Calypso was released back into the sea, the Maelstrom was summoned, and it was a showdown between himself and Jack Sparrow. It ended with Bill Turner desperately trying to get involved to save Will. Jones then impaled Will and left him teetering on the edge of death. Just as Jones was about to bring about the end of Bootstrap, Jack, Elizabeth, and Will all plunged a broken dagger into Jones's heart. Also symbolic, a broken dagger for a broken man. Then as Jones felt the sharp sting of the blade, he spent his final moments looking up at his lost love. He mutters, "Calypso," then falls into the sea. And with his death, Jones was welcomed back into Calypso's arms, and the Flying Dutchman acquired a new captain, William Turner. While Davy Jones deserved what he got, there is still a bit of satisfaction that he returned to Calypso, and all is as it should be.
Do you see? Do you see, my king?
The foreboding Stannis Baratheon is my final example. My personal favourite character in the Song of Ice and Fire books. This is a man who didn't want the burden of the throne, but with every fibre of his being believed it was his duty. He also understood that it was his right, being the brother of Robert Baratheon.
We must do our duty, no? Great or small, we must do our duty.
I wouldn't ever argue against a person who wants to call Stannis a villain. The atrocities this man commits are heinous to say the least. Shortening Davos Seaworth's fingers as a cruel punishment, the assassination of his younger brother Renly with blood magic, and, the most disturbing, the burning of his young daughter Shireen, which causes Selyse Baratheon to take her own life. Stannis isn't as compelling in the show as he is in the books, but I found that his demise in the show was still incredibly captivating. Towards the end of his life, Stannis essentially gives himself to the Lord of Light, and this was from putting too much faith in Lady Melisandre, who whispers notions of destiny in Stannis' ear throughout the entire show, ones that Stannis completely believes. These weren't lies, mind you, but they weren't true either. Melisandre believed them just as much as Stannis did. She truly believed he was the Lord's chosen.
He's right. You need him. He has a part to play in the war to come.
You see, Sir Davos? You've been saved by that fire god you like to mock. You're in his army now.
He wasn't necessarily an evil man, but he was disturbingly ruthless and dedicated himself to his cause so completely that not even family mattered more than his destiny. His life comes to an end when he marches his men through the brutal winter, where most of them died or deserted him, then walks on foot to the doors of Winterfell, where the Bolton army are there in force. Stannis knows he has nothing left to live for, so as the disciplined commander he is, walks fearlessly into the fray. And sends many Boltons to the grave. Then, Brienne of Tarth finds a wounded Stannis in the woods and demands him to confess his crimes, which he does, willingly. He realises all the lives he's taken have been in vain, and that his faith was misplaced. So at this point, as sad as it sounds, he doesn't care anymore.
I was Kingsguard to Renly Baratheon. I was there when he was murdered by a shadow with your face. You murdered him? With blood magic?
I did.
In the name of Renly of House Baratheon, first of his name, rightful king of the Andals and the First Men, lord of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm, I, Brienne of Tarth, sentence you to die. Do you have any last words?
To which he replies,
Go and do your duty.
How very poetic. And with a stroke of her sword, Brienne ends Stannis' life. Stannis Baratheon went out as he lived, fearless.
Hard truths cut both ways, Sir Davos.
My last example for the heartfelt final moments is Darth Maul. A death as tragic as his life, Maul is from Dathomir and was born into a world of evil and cynicism. The apprentice of Darth Sidious during the events of Phantom Menace, and later discarded by Sidious when his use for him had run dry. Maul continued to push against the Republic after Sidious rejected him for the purpose of depriving his old master of his greatest student. His plan ultimately failed, and after being driven mad by his pursuit of vengeance, he settles for claiming Obi-Wan's life. Maul is a man who has known nothing but the fight and the war.
Late for what? The Republic to fall? It already has, and you just can't see it. There is no justice, no law, no order, except for the one that will replace it. The time of the Jedi has passed. They cannot defeat Sidious. But together, you and I can.
He didn't know how to lead any other life. He may have chosen anguish and suffering, but anguish and suffering chose him right back.
Look what has become of you. A rat in the desert.
Look what I have risen above.
I have come to kill you, but perhaps it's worse to leave you here, festering in your squalor.
If you define yourself by your power to take life, your desire to dominate, to possess, then you have nothing.
When he finally catches up to Kenobi, he prepares for another lightsaber duel and makes his attempt on the old Jedi Master. But as the old adage goes, with age comes wisdom. Maul attempts to strike down Obi-Wan with the same maneuver he used against Qui-Gon all those years ago, but Obi-Wan had been expecting that. And with a single stroke, Obi-Wan is able to cut down Maul, and the former Sith falls into his arms. With his dying breath, Maul asks Obi-Wan if the one he is protecting is the Chosen One.
Tell me, is it the Chosen One?
When Obi-Wan confirms his suspicion, Maul takes solace that he and all those who have suffered at the hands of Sidious will be avenged.
He will avenge us.
Even in death, Maul's focus was always on his vengeance. The reason this death carries so much emotion is because we're seeing both a man who has suffered so much finally getting a chance to rest, and also a man who has every reason to hate Maul, but still treats him with compassion and respect in his final moments.
We've presented a few ironclad cases of tragic, or at least somewhat heartfelt villain downfalls. Sometimes it's not all hellfire and brimstone. Sometimes their villainy is initially the only thing we see, but there's so much more beneath the surface. Sometimes analysing and understanding a villain is about looking within. All villains will commit crimes and atrocities. This comes with the territory. We've established that they deserve punishment. On this we can all agree. But if we disregard that for a moment, and instead focus on trying to figure out why they made the choices they did, there can most certainly be room for understanding, philosophy villain or not. It can also simply be about acceptance. There isn't always a deeper reason for someone's evil. Sometimes that's just who they are. It's just a part of their being.
These villains clearly deserve no empathy, but when we look upon others, those who deserve it, we should always try to walk the line of the understanding and accepting. For some aren't villains by choice, so maybe we can find it within ourselves to forgive them. And for those who choose the path of evil, we can let them be a lesson. Their choices need not be repeated. And maybe we can apply these cautionary tales to our own lives. Maybe we can all benefit from them by choosing not to be the bad guy.
The villain is the mind-boggling, blood-rushing, fear-inducing figure that dominates the screen, the antithesis of a hero. Villains are often a warning for us to be mindful of our practice and behaviours. Sometimes they can be soul-crushing to watch, but others can even be inspirational. Because their darkness isn't all they have. The grand and glorious Darth Vader was able to come back from the dark out of pure love for his son.
So thank you. Thank you to the overwhelmingly powerful monster villains who always fill the room with their unbridled might.
Thank you to the insidious civilian villains and their strategist nature and cunning tactics.
Thank you to the thought-provoking philosophy villains who always have the audience scratching their head, intrigued by their notions and motivations.
Thank you to the victim villains and their moments of vulnerability and the empathy they inspire within us.
Thank you to the twist villains, who never fail to surprise us and have us on the edge of our seat.
And the suspected villains have our gratitude forever. We won't forget the sacrifices you all made.
Without the big bad, the story is futile.
The ultimate test for the good guy is the bad guy.
And the ultimate test for the bad guy is often themselves.
For those who can't overcome themselves, of them we will always remain vigilant.
And for those who can, we help them on that path.
But wherever there's light, there will always be dark. And for those that lurk within, we see you.
I've been Jamie.
And I've been Damien. This was a thank you to the satisfying villain.
And until next time,
take care.